Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity. And my ongoing goal is to find and talk to interesting people and see what makes them tick. And inevitably, we all learn a lot and hopefully feel some inspiration. If you're looking at your screen right now going, is this deja vu? The good news is it is and it isn't. If you recognize my special guest today, you should recognize her if you follow me because this is not our first or even second rodeo, but it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome back Lisa Cooper Ellison. This is her first time on this podcast. We go back a ways. For those of you that are just getting your first introduction, I envy you. Let me give you the official bio, and then you'll get a good sense of why I admire her so much as we're talking today. But Lisa is an author, speaker, trauma-informed writing coach, and host of the amazing Writing Your Resilience podcast. She works and writes at the intersection of storytelling and healing and combines her personal experiences and clinical training to help writers turn tough experiences into art. Her essays and stories have been widely published, including in the New York Times, Huffington Post, Risk, and many, many others. She recently completed a memoir, Please Stage Dive Carefully: How I Survived My Brother's Suicide and Forgave Myself. Wow. Lisa, welcome back. And as always, it's an absolute joy to be in conversation with you.
I am so happy to be here today and to see you. I'm a huge fan of your podcast and all the things that you do out in the world. And so, yeah, I'm just looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I think the best way to set it up, obviously, my goal is always to showcase and show off that I'm lucky enough to be in conversation with cool people. So, letting people get a better sense of who you are and what you do will be mission accomplished. But I think we also can dive in a bit because in our previous conversations, which I'll provide links to, including things you've done with 1455, we don't want to repeat too much, although
Mhm.
it's very evergreen topics. But today's conversation, I think, when you and I met on your podcast, we talked a lot about the resilience thing and
Mhm.
how a writer carves out, an existence and keeps perspective and keeps productive. And we certainly will veer into those lanes. But you do so much, and it's so both specific and encompassing in the sense that you talk about a lot of things with a lot of people, you work with a lot of things, you write about a lot of things. I want to dive a little bit into your whole vibe and sensibility and how you approach craft. So I want to tee it up broadly, but I think this will get us off and running for sure. I've said this before on this podcast, but I really think it always bears repeating for those of us that have been in the game for a while. I think 10, 15, 20 years ago, any writing coach or professor would say the primary message is you have to write your best story and then revise it,
Mhm.
get it out into the world. And that, of course, hasn't changed. But as we both know and talk about a lot, in 2025, any writer has to be wearing a lot of different hats.
Yes.
They have to at least be on social media. They might not like it. Hopefully they can be authentic and at peace. But the days of kind of hiding behind the typewriter and helping your work finds an audience, those no writing coach would advise someone to remain unengaged. So just jotting down notes before this conversation, I wrote down like, here are some big hats we all have to wear. The writer hat, the podcaster hat, if one goes into this
Mhm.
area, the promotion dash PR branding, brand building hat, and then there's a very overlooked and under-discussed one, which you are an expert in, which is, and I have this in all caps, how to be as healthy and happy a human being while you're writing and while you're not writing. So as if that's not enough to throw at you, but let's riff a little bit on the notion of kind of the changing responsibilities and obligations of a writer, and how does one do all these things and still feel great about it?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I'm just going to take a deep breath in and out, thinking about it because, oh my gosh, the realities of being a writer in 2025 are that there are so many things that you have to do. And I'm going to say it right now, this system is not sustainable. So when we think about being a healthy writer,
Yeah,
and healthy human being, some of that is going to be, yes, playing the game, doing the things that are needed
yeah,
in a way that aligns with who you are and recognizing that you may not be able to do everything and be happy. So I have colleagues and I have clients who are wildly successful,
mhm,
and some of them feel great about all of the things they're doing, and some of them feel exhausted and have in fact had depressions as a result of trying to do it all. And so you talked about a number of the hats that I wear, and I'm actually wearing some more hats, which I'm really excited about. So I work as a trauma-informed writing coach. Anybody who doesn't know what that is, I understand what trauma is, how it impacts the writing process, and how to regulate yourself and optimize your creativity, regardless of what you're writing about. So that I've been doing for a long time.
yeah,
And now I'm adding the Akashic Records in, which is tapping into the field of infinite possibilities. And I'm also working with human design. And here's the reason why I'm really excited about human design is that there are 1,000 strategies that we share with people that may or may not work for you specifically.
right.
And so really learning how to understand who you are,
Yes.
how your unique operating system works, which is what human design does, and being able to pick and choose the things that are going to work best for you is part of how we create sustainable writing lives. And because when it's sustainable, then we can actually hear that still small voice inside us, which is where the magic lies.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to dive. I love that, Lisa. And you know what that makes me? I mean, again, we have talked about this. I talk about it all the time in and outside this podcast. We recognize the rules of engagement in terms of like
Hmm.
what one needs to do to kind of be part of the industry, but it's almost set up to be exhausting and there's going to
Yes.
be letdowns. And most of us, again, that have been in the game for a while, and look, I always am quick to say, if someone has success right out of the gate, statistics, someone has to be that person. That's
Right, of
wonderful.
course.
I think that's where you come in and say, even if you are good and lucky enough to hit a grand slam on your first book,
Hmm.
do you want to build a sustainable career? That means being healthy and cultivating practices that are sustainable. But I think for the rest of us that are at different levels and constantly hustling, modern life is arguably set up in a late stage capitalist model. Like we're exhausted
Yes.
all the time. We're getting more and more information coming in. So I think it's understandable, and I think you and I are both, very tuned in to being empathetic ears for what others might, dismiss as complaining. Like no one said you had to be
Hmm.
a writer. It's like, look, we can recognize that writers do tend to be sensitive people. There's so much solitude, so much rejection, even if
Yes.
you're great at it. So I love the idea of really diving deeper into what kind of person are you and what will make you happy,
Hmm.
regardless of literary, and I always have to do this, but literary success. Let's hope that's literal, but like regardless of how good you are, how great your success is, what is going to make you happy? Talk a little bit more about some of the things that you're able to get people to understand, because I think we live in a society where we want the hack, right? We want
Hmm.
someone to explain to us, just do these 5 things and you'll be good. That's never going to work for writers.
Exactly. And because there aren't any hacks. I
Yeah.
mean, for the most part, it's important to appreciate that writing is an art form that takes time to learn. And there are a number of different skills that you have to acquire. And so practice is a piece of it. And also, I think it's important for people to realize that just because you wrote it doesn't mean it's for everyone or for a public audience. There are tons of things that we all write that are deeply fulfilling and they're just for us. And so being able to parse out what is for the public
Yeah,
and what is for yourself is really important because if it's for an audience, it needs to serve that audience. And in some ways, that's where social media or writing for publications can be really helpful because you see what resonates, you see what questions people have, and then you can look at how the stories you're telling are addressing those questions or those needs in some way.
yeah,
Because the very best writing serves as a mirror for your reader's soul. It's not necessarily a mirror for yourself.
yeah,
And so, having that mindset and that humility is really important
yeah,
and then thinking about, okay, so that's part of the writing life. And how do I create it in this way that is sustainable? Is recognizing you can't do everything all at once. And so sometimes you have to prioritize and say which parts are the most important and how much energy do you have.
right,
So, as an example, I'm a person with a lot of energy. I have always been this way. People have always said you're like the Energizer Bunny. That does not mean that my energy is, infinite.
right,
There are certainly limits to that that I have to be really aware of, but I have a lot of energy, so I have this capacity to do a lot of things. I have other clients, and this is not about motivation or skill or anything like that. They're not designed in that way, that they
yeah,
have more limited energy. And so you have to be able to respect the energy you have. And when that's the case, figure out how are you going to channel that energy in a way that is the most productive. Are you going to spend that time on social media as an example, or are you going to spend that on your creativity?
yeah,
And the other piece that we don't talk about a lot is the importance of rest. So I just recently took off. I actually took off for an entire month. I've done this 3 years in a row. The first time it was terrifying. And I will say every time there's this little like, oh my gosh, have I remembered everything or have I gotten enough done so that I can take this time off?
yeah,
But if you don't add rest into the equation,
yeah.
you're not going to be able to identify the right ideas or work with those ideas or hear what's supposed to be next in your work.
Yeah, there, Lisa, as always with you, I'm so giddy right now because there's you just drop so many nuggets of knowledge and wisdom. But to try to unpack that a little bit, I think you're talking first about a more mature approach to writing where one recognizes this wonderful tension between wanting and needing to write what you need to write and finding your authentic voice. That's everything, but being
Hmm.
cognizant that there is a marketplace and having a respect for the audience
Yes.
and how that work is going to land, that is part and parcel to why you might be having certain successes, doing the research
Hmm.
and figuring out who you're pitching to, what agents or editors you're targeting. This is all part of the balance that we get said at the beginning. Ideally, a genius sits down and writes and it flows, and then the right audience finds it. The reality is, along the way to that happening, even for the great ones, there are a lot of middlemen and women in the form of agents, editors, first readers, etc. So I think that's crucial that you note that. I also think it ties into what we were also saying about 2025. I think we make the mistake in America of more is better in all cases.
Hmm.
If you're trying hard enough, it'll all work out. And you just, totally debunk that. Not only is that not the case, if a writer's burned out or throwing too many things at the wall, especially as it
Yes.
relates to their kind of online presence, that can be
Hmm.
counterproductive. And I love the way you phrase that about the right idea might not even find its way because you're exhausted. I think that warrants so many underlines. Like rest is critical. And I don't think, athletes are told that, business people are told that. I think in a weird way, writers are harder on themselves than anyone else because the writer feels if I'm not putting in the time every day, or you read all these famous writers that talk about their routine and I sit down and
Hmm.
from 8 hours, it's like That's a place of privilege, first of all. If you're able to
Yes.
sit down uninterrupted for 8 hours, that's a great place to be, ostensibly, but recognize that very few writers, except for the very successful, and by which I mean money, have the luxury of spending most of each day not dealing with work and finance and family, et cetera. So, yeah, maybe talk a little bit more about how you get people to recognize and overcome those kind of cultural barriers about what hard work means and what meaningful work means.
Yeah, so what I often start with when I'm working with someone is to get them to answer this question. How do you hope to grow as a result of working on this project? So, how do you want to feel differently, behave differently, or experience the world in some different way as a result of doing this project? And the reason why I ask people to do that is because if that transformation happens inside you, it's automatically a success. And that way, you're not trying to use things like, whether or not something gets published or, whether or not it meets certain metrics or reaches a certain number of people as your marker of success, because those are things outside of your control. And if you're trying to do things to work towards those metrics, which it's perfectly fine if you want to. In fact, I have a friend who's a best-selling author, and she knew very clearly, this is what I want, and I'm willing to do all of the things that will make that happen. And she did.
Yeah.
And, she just sold another book. But we can't control that. You could have that wish and that desire, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I've seen so many writers place all of their wishes and all of their hopes in these baskets that create tremendous stress. They feel this pressure to not just get it right, but to get it done quickly. And as you and I both know, writing happens in at the pace it's going to happen. And we have to accept that that's not a bad thing. That's just how art works. And if you give it the time that you need, you're going to be really proud of what you come up with because you're going to know it's what you really want to say.
Yeah, and so needless to say, I completely agree and endorse that. But lest anyone listening right now be like, yeah, yeah, but look, we all know that the winners try hard. I will speak for myself, but I'm certain you can relate. I personally know writers who've had levels of success that any aspiring writer would envy, whether it's in the form of sales or notoriety, reviews,
Hmm.
and they're not happy. And some of them have been on this podcast. Some of them have talked about why they're not happy. It really underscores what you're talking about. Like, even if, kind of the be careful what you wish for, even if from a writing and artistic perspective, knock it out, if one's not working on things that are deeply meaningful or things that are going to make you proud a year or five from now, I think it's a safe bet that all the accolades and book sales and money are not going to sustain not only a long writing life, right? But like we've been talking about, a long, healthy life, period. And I think what I appreciate the most, Lisa, about the wisdom that you always provide is really kind of reinforcing. It's obvious, but I don't think it's discussed enough. The writing life and life with a capital L are inextricable, right? And one shouldn't want to separate. It doesn't mean that a writer is always writing 24/7 or when you're resting, you're not thinking about it. But it's this notion of a healthy life feeds the healthy muse, and it becomes a self-reinforcing, maybe perpetuating, reality.
Yeah, there's this dance between the life that we're living and the experiences we have and the art that we create. And that's always happening. And so the more you can embrace the dance and allow each part to have its value, the more you're going to be able to use your life as the muse for your art.
Yeah.
And I think when we think about this in terms of being a business, because if you want to sell books, for example, this is a business and you need to develop some business acumen. When we see people who are wildly successful and also unhappy, here's one of the things that can happen. And I know a lot of people who are like, my dream just came true. Why am I miserable?
Right.
Is that Part of what happens when you're working on something is that you get all of these dopamine hits, right? The reward is in the effort. And once you sell it or it's over, your dopamine actually it goes down. So that's one of the reasons why people have depressions after they sell a book or they, launch a book in the world, on top of all of the things that they do that create exhaustion. And the other thing is that this idea that, when you're writing a book, as an example, the problem is, will it get picked up? Will I sell this book?
Yeah.
Once you've sold a book, it's not that problem doesn't go away because are you going to sell your next book? But you also have another problem is that now your work is a commodity. And this is something I've noticed, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, is that I see people really struggle with creating something new once their work is a commodity because they see the whole process in a different light.
I mean, I can't help. I just want to turn it back to you and say, I think you already laid out so perfectly when we talk about sustaining a career, writing things that are meaningful. That doesn't just mean on the individual project. I think one is always setting up a sensibility, a style, which doesn't mean, right? There are certain writers that bounce in and out. In fact, I mean, I write poetry, nonfiction,
Hmm.
fiction, but many writers kind of have their thing. It's more than enough and they stick to it. But there has to be some fundamental curiosity or dissatisfaction that the writer is examining, placating, toying with, illuminating. If the process and look, this is going to sound spiritual, which I have no problem with, but I don't even mean it to sound spiritual. But if the process isn't on a very deep level, something that you're kind of unloading. What I've found with my own work, and I repeat this to younger writers all the time. It might sound like advice a loser gives to losers, like you should be shooting for the shooting for the stars. Of course you should. And, everyone should want to be successful,
Hmm.
make money all day, every day. The statistics tell us repeatedly there are very few in any endeavor that are going to reach those heights. So
Yes.
if you're truly not happy when the work is done, whether it's ahead of schedule, behind schedule, when you put something that you've put a lot of yourself into, what I've found is when I'm done with it, I'm done with it. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that a year later I pick up something I've written that's been published and I'm so happy and I notice I would change that word. That's the writing. That's a whole other kind of issue and it's a cute one. It's like, we're never done, but I can walk away from a project and feel recharged and ready to drop into
Yes.
something else. And I'll also add, again, you've already just teed it up for me. I truly believe, and what you said resonates with me, having the healthy life and that balance is also feeding the curiosity. If you're living a life
Hmm.
where you aren't, even if you want to be or are allowed to be on the proverbial mountainside in your cabin writing away, I think in 2025, the writers that are connecting with audiences are part of this world and they have things to say so that when they write things, even if they feel very personal, many readers are going to identify and recognize that and say, I feel the same way, which has always been the impulse, right? That's the magic of art, is that something that was written 200 years ago in a different language sounds like it is the best advice you'd ever read today. So I think it always comes back to, if you're doing the work where you're the ultimate arbiter of whether it succeeded or not, everything else that happens can either be a happy accident or it really is irrelevant. And
Hmm.
again, I appreciate that a lot of people might hear that and say, that sounds like something that someone that's never been a New York Times bestseller would say. Fair enough. But I know for a fact that, again, having talked to writers that maybe were chasing a trend and had success, but they felt like as you get older, I only have this one life. I only have so many books I'm going to be able to write. Why would I spend a year or three or five on a project I didn't believe with all my heart?
Hmm. I was actually in a cab with someone, and I wish I had written her name down because I thought I was going to remember it. And then, of course, you get out of the cab and it's like, "Bloop."
Yeah.
But one of the things she said is that the best writing comes from a place of being haunted by the material or the idea. Because when you're haunted by it, And that can be haunted in a positive way. It doesn't have
Sure.
to be, just some nightmarish thing. You are going to have that passion to be able to see it through. You're going to be curious about what that is. And I will own the fact that, I'm going to take this to a spiritual level. The things that haunt us are these things that we have a connection with something outside ourselves. And you can translate that in whatever way works for you. It does not have to follow any kind of theology.
Sure.
But when we're haunted by something, it's often because we don't understand an experience, and there's something out there that's forcing us to have to reckon with it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important thing to think about is how are you haunted by that? Because you have to really, 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 really have something you want to say in order to get a book completed and published. And that's any book.
Totally, totally. And that perfectly tees up. I have one question based on previous discussions we've had. So I'm going to read it so I don't get it wrong, but I have this in bold
Yeah.
on my paper, which is the notion of riffing on the idea of how a writer can harness their authorial voice in a chaotic and polarizing world. I think we've already been certainly dancing around that, but I know that's like kind of your sweet spot, right? Like if everything's crazy, even in someone's life, like how does one find something that haunts them? I mean, certainly if it's haunting you, you've already found it, but
Hmm.
how does one remove barriers, remove denial, remove fear in order to access, this is what I really want to write about and more. Now that I've identified it, how do I write it in a way that avoids cliche, that isn't imitating all the different authors that I admire? How does one cultivate and then perpetuate a distinctive voice?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge that you have fear. Because if you're not acknowledging that you have fear, and who doesn't have fear in this world that we are living in right now with
Yeah,
so many unknowns and changing things? And
yeah,
I see, especially on social media, I mean, there are so many people who have voices that sound so certain. And I think when we think about how do you write in a way that acknowledges the polarity and also is true to your authenticity, is to recognize that certainty is bullshit, right? Nobody is that certain. And I think I see this on Instagram a lot, so I'm just gonna say this, but it's in everywhere. And I see it in the wellness culture. Oh, if you just do these 3 to 5 things, or even in our field, I got pitched by someone who said they had the magic formula for always creating a New York Times bestseller. And if you just followed these 7 steps, which they had analyzed for all these books to create, then your book is going to be an overnight success. You're going to have the certainty that you're looking for.
yeah,
And the reality is that when you can embrace the uncertainty,
yeah,
then you can find the questions inside yourself that need to be answered. And I think the other piece about this is the importance of community and being able to not go from, being the writer in your home by yourself, writing away to suddenly wanting to have this published and in front of thousands, if not millions of people.
yeah.
So here's an example. I have this client and she recently had a piece published in HuffPost. Shout out to Beth Doherty. So proud of her.
Yay.
And this was her first publication.
Amazing.
And we worked for months on this project, but also she was part of this small cohort of writers who got together and meditated and read things out loud over and over and over again. And what we talked about in this group was what's working well. So she was able to understand and embrace her strengths
Yeah,
and really hone her voice by getting that kind of feedback, which we often think about the critical feedback, and critical feedback certainly has its place. You have to have that at a certain point. But there's so much that we can learn from positive feedback that we tend to dismiss because it feels like it's softball,
right.
feedback, and it's not.
Yeah,
But we did that work and then we worked on nervous system preparation for how it might feel to be able to have your work seen by so many people,
Mhm.
to go from, the small group to the larger group. And I think Amelia Ruby, she has this wonderful podcast, Off the Grid. So I'm saying her name because this is where I got it from. She was on my podcast and she talked about how, we have to prepare our nervous systems for success. We may think, oh, I want to write this thing and I want it to go viral and then that's going to be great. But part of the misery comes from the fact that you're not ready for that. It's a wish that you have, but you haven't tested the waters to see what is it like for 10 people to see your work, 100 to people to see your work, and now, thousands or millions of people to see your work,
Yeah.
because the level of vulnerability that comes from that is huge. And HuffPost and many of the other places, the commenters, they are not kind. I
Right.
think that sometimes they're the worst commenters. I had a publication on HuffPost and I felt very proud of it. And I know not to read the comments. And I waited a whole month, but I read them for a very specific reason. There was a very specific reason why I read them. And there were some people, they just said trolly things for no reason.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I have gotten to a place where I was able to say, that's about you.
Right.
That's about you and attention seeking.
Yeah.
But not everybody is there. And no matter how many times you say things like, don't read the comments, they're going to read the comments.
Sure.
And that kind of stuff can be devastating. And I think that's where having a blog on Substack or some other platform, or having a social media platform where you're testing the water with your ideas, can be really helpful, because you're getting used to having the experience of people seeing your work, seeing you, and then you can see how that feels. Because we don't take enough time to really ask ourselves this question. We're told like we're supposed to want like meteoric success, but do we really want it?
Right. Right. It makes me think of, the whole be careful what you wish for, which of course applies to so many things, right? Love, jobs, what college you go to. To me, it always gets back to this notion of at least trying to identify a true north for your own individual, psyche. What is going to make you happy? What do you know from the start, right? Because we don't know if we're going to get the work we're doing completed, how it's going to be received, if it's received at all, how it's going to be reviewed, etc. But the one thing we can control is what we put into the world.
Hmm.
And that gives me a chance to circle back a little bit because I've definitely talked about this before. I imagine you talk about it pretty often, but I also think it's worth, especially for maybe younger, writers. It seems a little oxymoronic, but this notion of writing about trauma, that can be healing for the individual as well as readers, and that can cultivate wonderful communities that are nourishing and reinforcing. But what do you tell people who need to understand that just because you're feeling something very strongly, the art of writing is different from, say, a journal or a
Hmm.
blog, something that's meant for an audience that you want to be able to make sure 10 years from now you feel good about the way that was written, and when it's still fresh, you don't have that perspective yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to explore, because just because you feel something strongly doesn't mean it's ready for an audience. And so, what I tell people is that first write about it. And catharsis is not enough, right? Catharsis is that experience of the bloodletting, of getting the emotions out. And it can feel so satisfying.
Right.
And when we have catharsis, we have momentary relief. But here's how you can know the difference between catharsis and actually making meaning from your experience. If you continue to roll that same situation around in your head in the same exact way and you have the same exact feelings, you may be in a catharsis cycle that's not useful,
Mhm.
right? So when you make new meaning from your experience, and that's what readers want. They don't want to know how much it sucked. I mean, they do at a certain point. They
Right.
do want to know that.
Right.
But they don't want it to be like life sucks and then you die. The end. Right?
Right.
Nobody wants to read that. And so you have to do the work inside yourself to make new meaning. And does that mean that your situation doesn't suck or that it's not hard?
Right.
It's not dismissing it for the sake of coming up with that beautiful ending,
Yeah.
but to really dig deep and say, how am I taking control of my life
Yeah.
by looking at this experience in a different way or making new choices based on what I've realized? Because that is in your control.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think as it relates to trauma and every aspect of balancing TMI with putting yourself out there,
Hmm.
I think I use the word I don't use very often for a variety of reasons. I think I use the word mature writer, and of course I mean it in the literal sense of someone that's done something and is able to understand what works. But I think the younger it's not enough for a writer to say, but this is real. This is my truth.
Hmm.
Yes, that's critical. That's important. But just like in a workshop, I think something that a lot of young writers learn if they're fortunate enough to be in a workshop environment, either an undergrad or grad school, when you're in the workshop getting criticism and responding to it, and you're still having training wheels to an extent because the mature writer learns you need to future proof you're not going to be able to be in front of the readers and explain things to them when they have questions. And in fact, you shouldn't want to
Yes.
be. You have to write in a way that, as far as is humanly possible, removes ambiguity, makes things clear so that tiny editorial mechanical concerns aren't part of it. I think that also applies, and you just put it really well. Like as it relates to trauma, if something fresh or if there's not a different perspective that has emerged from the thinking or the pain, it's not that that's not worth writing about, but is that something that a larger audience that doesn't know you is going to find new? Because let's face it, a lot of these topics, trauma or otherwise, there's only so many human experiences, right? The whole art of it is rendering things in a unique way. But these are all topics that are well covered. So I think in a weird way, that should be motivation for writers. The fact that we have a finite amount of things to write about,
Hmm.
once you're inside those things, then the options and the possibilities are limitless. But I think being cognizant of, even if I write this as well as possible, is it going to sound like every other cancer story or, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera? So I think it's important, and I'm certain that you do this to explain to writers, like, doesn't mean you can and shouldn't write about whatever you want, but understand in advance there are reasons why certain things just won't succeed.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about this from two different angles. And the first angle is from the scene and what we're all told, which is show, don't tell. That is great advice. Sometimes we also need to tell. But if we think about show, don't tell, especially for writers that are emerging, right? Newer writers,
Yeah.
we'll say younger writers in that sense,
Yeah.
they think that I have to share all of what happened. And I think what happens when someone's experienced trauma, especially if they've experienced something horrific, is that the brain can get caught in a trauma loop where you're writing down every single aspect and every nitty-gritty detail of the thing. And I'm going to take it to an extreme example of a sexual assault, right? Or sexual abuse. Most of the time, we do not need every single horrific detail of what happened,
Right.
especially when we're dealing with childhood sexual abuse, because people have low tolerance for that. So readers may not be able to go there. Does that mean you may not have a project where having the reader confront that is important? Yes, but you want to think about why am I doing that? Is that truly about the project or about some higher purpose, or is that something in me? So that's a question you're going to ask yourself.
Right.
So a lot of times you can write things in such a way that the reader can fill in the blank because what they actually care about is how did the character cope in the moment. So you want to be identifying that moment of change or choice. And sometimes the choice is I chose to check out, or I I chose to decide that, people aren't trustworthy. I mean, it could be a thousand choices and not all of them are positive, but that
Right.
you're really looking for that place where there is some sort of internal change, internal decision making that happens in
Yeah.
every single scene that you write. And so that's thinking about it at the scene level. And when you're doing that, your work is going to it's going to have that propulsive quality that's going to have a higher likelihood of working, especially when it's connecting to something that's happening out in the world, or you've created that change in a way that feels clear and cohesive. But the other piece, when we're thinking about, is this ready for public consumption? And 10 years from now, am I going to feel good about that? Is keeping your side of the street clean. And this is especially true in memoir, right? So there is always somebody who has done us wrong. Always.
Yeah.
And how you feel about that person now is going to be different 10 years from now, just because you're going to be older or in a different space of life. Does that mean what they did is right? No. But
Right.
if you are writing from that vindictive vendetta space, and a lot of writers know that and they think that they're not doing it, but it shows up in the work. You really have to do the work of forgiveness. And here's what I mean by forgiveness, because it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
I do not mean sweeping things under the rug
Right.
or making it so that what happened is right. What I mean is that you've done the work of feeling all the feelings and addressing all of the secret wishes that you have so that you can let this go and do something that is very difficult. Recognize that someone did their best and their best was harmful. And that is a process. It's one of the reasons why memoir takes so long is you need to do that work because when you do, this two things happen. Number one, this becomes a story that you are more objective about. You're going to be willing to do the hardcore editing that's required to take something over the finish line.
Yeah.
And then down the road, you're going to be able to own that no matter how that person feels about the work or how this work is received, you did the work and you're proud of it. You know you kept your side of the street clean. And I talk to people about this all the time. And
Yeah.
I also say we have these periods where we have to write through the fact that we're writing the shitty version of this and this person, did us wrong. And that's okay. We can do that. We just have to own it.
Yeah. So true, so helpful. And I think that also speaks to a reminder to anyone, whatever their level of experience, there's so much rewriting and revision, and sometimes getting it all out in a very ugly, unformed fashion is very healthy and necessary because it is scratching some aesthetic and spiritual itches, and then one can continue to get distance and refine and craft. I would say just listening to you talk, I mean, it's so clear how that applies to memoir. Um, I think with fiction, it's completely different, but a similar
Hmm.
impulse, I think, with fiction writers, especially circa now. It's almost impossible to avoid politics, whether we're talking about social
Yes.
political reality, cultural differences, etc. And for me, when I have my editing hat on, or even just my reading hat on, as soon as I can tell exactly where a person's coming from politically, or the characters are either intended to be so good or so bad, what a lot of inexperienced writers never understand is that that's bad writing because we only need to look at the newspaper to see that version of reality or have our own
Yes.
chats. The harder work is seeing this humanity, which again, I think you said it a different way, but I agree. It's not extending unnecessary grace to an evil person, but it's understanding, and I think where the beauty of fiction and just writing comes in is the person wrestling with, but we all are born. What happens? Is it geography, circumstance, parents, bad luck, relationships, etc., that impact how different people turn at different points and make certain decisions? That's where the guts and the good stuff
Hmm.
of writing occurs. So staying on the surface level or not having the confidence to say, I'm going to write about this bad person from the first person perspective. Are people going to think it's me? No. And if so, who cares? Like good writing will find a way to inoculate itself from those concerns, which ultimately are pretty ephemeral.
Yeah. And there's two things I would add to that. I would say, number one, if you're writing fiction, even if your characters and the situation are very different from you, there's some aspect of it that is also you, right? There is some deeper question inside yourself around could be rage, it could be loss, it could be something that you're working out through a fictional world. And so the more you can tap into what that is for you, the more you can translate that to the page. And you can keep your characters very different from you, but it's about that feeling state. Like, how are you wrestling with that feeling state? The other thing that I would say, and I feel like I've lost my train of thought, is that, well, it'll come back to me in a way. I think it was like I was so passionate about that, and then it was like, oh, the other piece.
Well, it'll come back to you, but so I have to say, right, folks, there is the proverbial green room. And before we came on the air, and uh, Lisa said, "By the way, are we going to be able to talk about Ozzy Osbourne?" And I was like, "You had me at hello." So, but I think this, I'll introduce this so it's not. I mean, hey, it's my podcast. We had this abrupt a segue, but I think this also, this actually speaks to tee this up. Lisa and I are both writers. We both read other writers. We support each other, both, I mean, in every sense of the word, literally, figuratively, through recommendations, through avoiding or transforming some of the pressure and angst by being a better literary citizen and cultivating these communities. So her question about Ozzy, in addition to whatever she wants to ask me, which I'm fascinated, but before I even hear it, I know this means that she read something I recently wrote, and this is what we're all talking about, right? It's not about having good friends that all help each other, although that's critical. It's about this notion of even writing as serious and hard as it can be, you're going to be happier and more fulfilled if you are part of something that's bigger than you.
Yes, and we both are part of the music scene. We both have this love of music, which I that's one of the ways I know we're kindred spirits. I remembered what I wanted to say and it fits in with this, but I'm going to get
Perfect.
to it when it's time. I have it
Okay.
written down.
Okay.
But my first thought is when, or my first question is, oh, so when did you discover Ozzy Osbourne? Like, how old were you? What was going on?
I can give it to you so clearly. So I was born in 1970. So when I was in seventh grade, was like 1982. His first two albums had come out. So Crazy Train, like when his solo career. So I didn't know Black Sabbath, but Ozzy, this was right when MTV started. So in my age group, Ozzy, was everything. And then personally, as I started getting into classic rock and other stuff. I wasn't a heavy metal guy, the hair metal. So Ozzy fell off my radar and I thought he was a little bit of a clown, by the mid 80s. When I got to college, late high school, early college, I met some people that were big Black Sabbath fans and that was the floodgates. And so Black Sabbath, their first eight albums from the 70s that Ozzy was on, those were revelatory to me and have been a touchstone for me. So, and as I've written about, even as a guy in my 50s, like the Black Sabbath catalog is absolutely vital to like my whole existence. So my admiration and respect for what those four dudes did in 8 years, can't say enough about it.
So we discovered Ozzy around the same time. I'm 4 years younger than you. I was born in 74. I actually, I was 6 when I discovered Ozzy, and I had older cousins. So I discovered Iron Maiden and Ozzy Osbourne around the same time. We had Rat Salad, which was one of Black Sabbath's albums in our house. I listened to it all the time. I was singing Iron Man, and there was something about it that I really resonated with. And when I was reading more about Ozzy after he died,
Yeah.
he grew up in this, it wasn't a Rust Belt, it was like this post-war um, town where there was
Birmingham.
all of this, yeah, there was all of this destruction around, and it was very blue collar, very working class. People did not have enough. And so when you grow up in those kinds of environments where lack is a big part of your world, I think you connect with the darkness a little more. But the other piece I really resonated with is that for him, Black Sabbath was performance. I loved that music. I mean, I remember like being the 6 year old with pigtails
Yeah.
singing Iron Man and blasting Paranoid.
Yeah.
And it was funny because growing up, Ozzy was seen as this really polarizing figure. I totally agree. He became a clown, especially 1985, like shot in the dark, what was going on there. But early on, like with Black Sabbath, he was seen as the Prince of Darkness. And, if you were into Ozzy, you were into devil worship and people needed to run away from you.
Yeah.
So I what was interesting for me about Ozzy is that he was seen in this just seen as pure evil for so long. And he did do some things that were pretty awful.
Right.
Like if you look at his, bio, he did some things that were terrible.
Hmm.
And yet there's also the Osbournes,
Right.
and he became this like beloved buffoon of a dad.
Yeah.
And then we get to these final days of his life, that final concert where he's
Yeah.
singing, "Oh my gosh, Mama, I'm coming home." And I don't know about you, but as soon as I saw it, I knew that he was not long for this world.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, Amen to all of that. I mean, I love him unreservedly. And when the two things I'd say about the Black Sabbath catalog is, and I love the way it's performance. What Ozzy brought that so many people then kind of imitated was unlike, say, a Robert Plant with Led Zeppelin, who was, based in the blues and was the
Hmm.
quintessential frontman, which was more Beatles. Ozzy was almost like this theatrical, like a theater kid, a bullied nerd. He was not a golden god. He was not Paul McCartney or Robert Plant, etc. He was the guy that understood what it was like to be beat up by the cool kids. And so even though he didn't write a lot of those lyrics, shout out to Terrence Geezer Butler, the bassist who wrote a lot of the lyrics. Geezer needed someone to sell those songs. So you point out Iron Man, I think of a song like War Pigs. I think
Hmm.
certain songs from the 60s, maybe to a younger crowd, like a certain Bob Dylan song, you get the lyrics, but there's certain songs you might hear and go, "Oh, that's an anti-war song. I didn't even realize." When Ozzy was singing War Pigs, yes, he was singing great words that had a message, but the way he was singing them took things to a whole other level. So there was a lot of style and authenticity to track all the stuff we've been
Hmm.
talking about. And I think that's one of the many reasons that band and that singer in particular connected and continues to connect with younger generations. You can't fake that feeling of vulnerability and anger. And what I find ceaselessly inspiring about the Sabbath catalog is, despite all the hype, those songs are all about individuality, self-expression, standing up to bullies, things a teenager needs to hear. But I'm still inspired by those in my 50s. Like I'll have that on in the car and be like fired up. And to me, it's important to point out, like, Superficial is great. Like Van Halen to me, superficial.
Hmm.
Like I need that rush. I'm all for it. Sabbath, there's something real deep and inspiring to me on a human level. I feel like other human beings are talking to me, and I just think that tracks with why are they so popular? I don't think it was because a lot of kids were looking at those four guys and going, I'm a heartthrob. They're so sexy. Like I'm sure there were, and God love them, but like that was not Beatles, Led Zeppelin, right? Like there was something about those dudes that I think made the rest of us feel like we could talk about that. We could be that. And it's funny because
Yes.
proof, right, that everything comes back. We've been talking about authenticity, finding one's distinctive style. Sabbath created something that then became now is derivative. Everyone wants a piece of
Hmm.
that. Complete success story artistically, from both in terms of craft, discipline, all the things we've talked about. Ozzy's whole career kind of epitomizes that.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a shout out to Geezer Butler as well because when I saw him in that final concert, I was like, "Holy smokes!" I mean, I knew he was talented, but then I saw like his playing. It was like, "Wow!" And
Yeah,
so, yeah, he had a lot of talent. But this is the thing about Ozzy is that as a singer, he is extremely unique. It is very difficult to emulate his sound, but he was not a super technically proficient singer. What
yeah,
he had was unique sound and deep passion.
yeah,
And I think the ways that he approached his work, embracing some of that complexity,
yeah.
is part of why he had that sustainability in his career. And this brings me back to what I wanted to say. when I got, when I had that moment of, we'll call it a brain fart. That's what I used to call it when I was teaching school. I had a brain fart. Is that, when we're thinking about characters, and especially we'll call them the evil characters, which
Yeah.
he was seen as the evil character at one point.
Yeah.
That is not interesting because humans are not all good or all bad. And I think if you look at how we see Ozzy Osbourne now, especially, that is a great example of the complexity of just the human experience
Totally.
because he was seen one way. I mean, I remember the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, and they wanted
Sure.
to abolish all of the things that he did, and all of the censorship work that went around that. But I think that's a great example of how no one is all good or all bad,
Yeah.
and we can admire them. And I think when we're trying to create great fiction, we want to create characters that do all of those things.
Amen. I mean, here, and I'll just add, to bring it even further full circle, there's a guy that sustained a decades-long career, um, had that humility. You got the sense, never phoned it in, really appreciated the fans, even when he was a
Hmm.
multimillionaire, always was humbled by his upbringing. He transcended it in multiple ways, always knew where he came from, and was somewhat in awe, right? He when he would talk about certain songs, or there was that air of mystery, like even he didn't understand. And I think as an artist and a critic, I look at that and I find that so refreshing and, yes, inspiring, because we don't have to figure it all out. And we do, despite all the things you and I have talked about, which I think is so valid and productive, leave a little room for awe and mystery and the things that come
Yes.
to us that we write or think or work through, that we're like, I don't know where that came from. And the reality, right, is it comes from in here, comes from here, but it also comes from all the history and culture that we're absorbing, channeling that in ways that are both understood and refined, but also leaving some space where we can also be in awe of what we've done. I think that maybe is the biggest secret to remaining humble, remaining grounded, and being able to see victories clearly. Like, am I on the right path? Am I doing this? Is it making me happy? That's how you can really measure that sustained life.
Yeah, I love that you are talking about making room for awe and making room for the fact that all of the things we do are bigger than us and we don't have to understand everything. And this leads to a coda from our last conversation, which we were talking about. I have all these great ideas in the shower, and how do I capture all of them? And people actually sent me waterproof notebooks, which was so cool. I got some waterproof notebooks in the mail,
Unbelievable.
and I love that. But I've been really being intentional about when the download happens, I've got my phone there and I'm just speaking it into the phone. And some of the best stuff comes from just the ideas there and just channel it. And I would say trust that process.
Yeah.
Trust that whatever that is the magic of the creative process working through you in whatever way you want to understand it.
Bravo. Yeah, I'll add to that happily. Look, I'm the first to lament the ways in which, don't even have to say more, right? What I'm about to say. Insert 15 minutes of ranting about connected devices and social media, but one advantage any writer of any age has today is 30 years ago, if one didn't have a pencil or was in an environment where one could get that idea down, it might get lost. Embrace the
Hmm.
fact that we have these miracles. At least there's the possibility of, if you're drifting into a nap or waking up, or in the car, or etc., we can capture these moments that are absolutely gifts. And yeah, I think you talk to enough writers, and I'll speak for myself, but I know there's a lot of people that will say this. You appreciate and are humbled and grateful for any of these moments that occur, but there's something about tapping into that awe where they happen more frequently. And I think that speaks volumes about how this is all part of the life. And it is. It couldn't be more spiritual, but I'm speaking very practically, making
Hmm.
all of this discipline and peace and health a part of one's kind of sensibility. It might shock people how the pieces start to fall into place more easily because you're already there. You're meeting these moments of amazingness before they happen to you.
Yes. And what I tell people a lot is that the unconscious creates and the conscious edits. And so if you
Perfect.
can bring those two things together, then you're going to have all of the tools you need in order to write well. But if you don't allow the unconscious to do its work and to just absorb from the environment and then create whatever it's going to create, it's I'm going to just ask you this question real quickly. We don't have to go down a deep rabbit hole, but I find that if I try to write from here, like, from my thinking part of the brain,
Yeah.
it's just not the same. I mean, it's not like I can't write a complete sentence or write a good sentence. I can. The energy is not the same.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just thinking, I jogged earlier today, and I was actually thinking about this irresolvable conflict, which is, I think Franz Kafka wrote something. I'll butcher the quote, but he's talking about a short story that he wrote that just came to him. He says he has a diary entry like, only in this way can art be created, this full flushing experience, and it's like those of us that have had those moments, they're such miracles and gifts, and a case could be made that is the way art should happen. The reality is, if we all sat around and waited, we wouldn't get as much done. I think we have to give ourselves enough credit that, the act of editing and revising or just writing, sometimes some magical things can happen unprompted. But it to me, it's always about being prepared for those moments, wanting those, like pleading for them in some way, but also recognizing that's also a bit of a cop out. I mean, gosh, it would be almost lit for me anyway. It would be too good to be true. Like every day I wake up and at 8 o'clock, the muse comes. I sit down and channel it out for an hour and then I go about my day. But it's somehow finding that whenever you can, or being open to that, but also recognizing that, look, a lot of writing is hard work. I
Hmm.
don't think you should do it if it really makes you miserable. But I'm working on a short story right now, case in point, and it's killing me, right? Because you can see it, you're grasping for it, you don't want to take shortcuts. There's this frustration of just wanting to, like, can I just set aside 6 hours and get it done? And a lot of times the answer is no, you can't. And it gets back to what you said earlier, Lisa, about having the wisdom to, it's going to take its time. You can alter that, I think, right? You can pour a little gasoline, or you can maybe realize you're pushing too hard and find that balance, but ultimately the right things will happen kind of at a pace that makes sense.
Absolutely. And trust both parts of the process. If you get something great that comes out of just a download that you've had, enjoy it and then know that it is probably not perfect and you're going to have to come to your desk and I come to my desk regularly. I have a regular practice and I think that's one of the things that mature writers learn to do. And when we talk about maturity again, experience is that you realize that it's all chop wood, carry water, right? You're going to show up and you just have to show up and
Yeah.
the sometimes the water is cold and delicious and sometimes it's a little swampy and that's all right.
Yeah.
You just keep doing that work and that's how stories get completed.
Yeah. I think, my parting shot would be to say, well, a few things aside from thanking you once again for giving me the pleasure of your company. Everybody, I'll put myriad links so you can easily find Lisa online. But if you're a writer or trying to understand some of this stuff, listen to her podcast, check her out online, follow her. You'll be richly rewarded. I think what you demonstrate, and you did it for me, but I will say mission accomplished. You're demonstrating, like, we didn't even really get into how busy your podcasting and coaching and writing schedule, but I think what it speaks to is you're good at it, you've gotten better at it, amazing. But there's a joy. There's a
Hmm.
joy that you find. You want to connect communities, you want to help people, you want to help yourself. And it's this beautiful, brilliant balance. I've used that word so many times, but it's so appropriate. It's this balance of ambition, responsibility, and just the sheer pleasure of, I think someone like you, and I think the reason we are kindred spirits is we both feel fortunate that we found something that we really love, even as we recognized at various stages along the way. Might be a long game. There's going to be
Hmm.
good days, bad days, a lot of blah days. But ultimately, what else would we be doing if we had the chance? I certainly look at you as someone that is an absolute role model for how to build this balanced life.
Well, thank you so much for all of that, Sean. And I just want to say thank you for having me on your podcast and for all of the ways that you build community. I think that is one of the things that inspires me the most. You are so good at that.
Hmm.
And you and you always have this curiosity about you. And I think I see that curiosity in all of the things that you put out in the world, and and it makes me more curious. So, and I think that's one of your gifts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I do. I think curiosity, is the key. If you are, we don't get old. I mean, we're going to get older, but I think that's the antidote to aging, and not in the literal sense. I mean, literally in the literal sense, but being in awe and full of wonder and knowing that there's just more we could learn. Human beings, animals, there's just so much to enjoy while we're here. Having that innocent kind of evergreen awe of the world, it works for me. It keeps the pipeline full enough, and I do think it's a way that is its own reward. Being curious and engaged makes you seek out interesting people, and your world expands accordingly. So it's a very self-perpetuating, pleasure system. So what more need to be said other than, like I said at the outset, not our first or second rodeo, but it won't be our last. I look forward to locking horns with you again in the future. But for now, Lisa, you continue to put out the work. We all can learn from that. I just wish you all the best. And I thank you for what you do for the literary and the literary community and beyond. Keep doing it. Everyone go check Lisa out, find her online, look at the links I'm going to put up, and we will see you all again soon. Be safe and stay well. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.